Hello and welcome to Random Walk, a companion podcast to the Alma Mac. I'm your host, Adam, and we're going to skip our Random Walk of the week and jump right into an interview I did with Joe Muise. I'll tell you more about Joe when we get started, but we're going to talk about physics education. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the podcast. We have a very special guest this week, Joe Muise. So Joe is a teacher at St. Thomas More Collegiate in Vancouver, British Columbia. Is that correct?
Burnaby.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And you recently attended as a panelist the CUPC 2021 conference. That's the Canadian Undergraduate Physics Conference. How was that?
It was really a fun time. The conversation was around the perception of physics by youth, and there were four of us from different sort of branches of education, but also outreach and diversity and inclusion sort of perspectives. And it was a fun 2-hour conversation. When I first found out that it was going to be a 2-hour-long panel, I was thinking this is going to be, too much time, but it flew by and it was a really, really engaging.
Yeah, this seems like the kind of topic that could go in a million different directions and balloon out in all sorts of different ways. So as a teacher at St. Thomas More, what kind of perspective were you bringing to this conversation, and how was that perceived by your panelists?
So I started physics teaching 18 years ago, and in my first year, I had 5 female students out of a class of 25, which shocked me to begin with because my undergrad experience was a bit more balanced. And right away, I set out to trying to recruit more girls into my physics classes just because I wanted to have more physics classes. No other perspective to start other than I wanted to have more people in physics. And over the last number of years, the number has grown close to 50-50. And we've gone from 1 block of physics 12 to 3 blocks of physics 12 in that time. And so I talk a lot about sort of ways of promoting girls in physics, but also making physics more inclusive to everybody and sort of to a broader appeal than just people that are thinking about going on in physics or engineering. And the panel came at this with different perspectives, and it was an interesting discussion. The first question was sort of like, what are misconceptions of physics by youth? And that the conversation just sort of spiraled out from there.
Yeah, so as far as misconceptions of physics, so when I was going through high school, physics 12, so let me just double check, Canadian curriculum based. Is that like a federal mandated thing, or would my physics 12 in Ontario potentially look different from British Columbia?
So education is provincially mandated.
Okay.
The non-AP or IB type courses, the physics 12 ends up lining up fairly well across the country. There was a pan-Canadian curriculum that was adopted at some point in time, I don't know, more than 15 years ago. That means that they're kind of largely similar.
Okay. And as far as taking physics 12 as a prerequisite for universities, is that generally a requirement, or is it almost always an optional course?
Yeah, so as far as, for graduation purposes, you need to have a science course at grade 11 or higher. Mm-hmm. If you're going to go on into science, you need to have, I think, 2 sciences at the grade 12 level. And for a lot of people, they wouldn't pick physics because there's a perception that physics is challenging and not applicable. And so, biology and chemistry tend to make a better pair for a lot of people unless they are convinced by someone otherwise.
Right, okay. So when you started seeking out more people to get into the physics stream, how did you go about that? Were you sort of asking students for input, current students, past students? Like, what was your strategy there?
Asking former students that went on into different fields, what they wish they had done differently in high school. And also just sort of what skills they use in their day-to-day to see what skills are transferable. And so I started targeting people that were interested in going on in business, tend to have good math skills. And so those math skills would play well in physics, and convince them that the problem-solving side of physics that they develop in a high school physics course would be beneficial for their future, whatever they wanted to do, really. Similarly, convincing people that were thinking more of a medical stream that physics in high school makes a lot of sense because it'll make your life easier when you have to hit physics at the undergrad level.
That's a really good point. Throughout TAing, I've also been able to do a bit of tutoring, and a lot of the people I tutor are people hoping to get into med school, and they've tried to avoid physics as much as possible. And it's usually our sessions usually start with 20 to 30 minutes of regret of not taking it earlier.
And I've had a couple of recent students come back that have just written the MCAT, and they said they used my notes from high school to study, and that they were really well prepared with that. So I think the idea that a foundation in physics in high school is important is really interesting. Mm-hmm. And there's stats out there that show that, among MCAT and LSAT writers, if you break it down by degree, physics is one of the top 2 or 3 for both of those in terms of MCAT and LSAT scores.
Interesting. That's the kind of thing that I feel like if high school students were shown frequently, that it would kind of maybe convince them to reconsider the whole physics stream.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
For me, if once they get to grade 11, they've already decided. So I almost need to have the conversation a year before, because in grade 10, at least here in British Columbia, is when you stop is the last year of a general science course. Then you kind of divide off into the different branches. So having that conversation with them about the utility of physics at a younger level, so they see it and can sort of plant the seed is important.
Yeah. So you brought up an interesting aspect of how people perceive physics. I think one of the most annoying tropes that physicists identify is that, you're sort of the squirrely, introverted, very dorky person. But what you brought up was that you can do physics not for physics' sake, but as a like a transferable baseline for, just problem solving and reasoning. Do you feel like that perception is sort of changing in your teaching and your students?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's general idea that, there's one of the misconceptions that, the squirrely eccentric physicist, but also the idea that it's only done by geniuses and that physics is really hard. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think as physics teachers, part of our job is to change that perception and sort of get the word out there. It's not just conversations with students as well. Like I talk to parents all the time, and how, if you start a conversation with your son or daughter by saying, "Oh, I took physics in high school and it was so hard," or "I hated physics in high school," how it frames their experience they're going to have, and try to avoid those conversations. And the same thing is having conversations with school guidance counselors around, their perception of what physics class was from 25 years ago is not the reality of what it is now. And I think, a lot of physics teaching has changed to have a lot more conceptual focus. So it's not just an applied math course, which makes it challenging for some students, but also makes it more appealing to other students as well at the same time. I don't know if I answered that last question or not. I kind of squirreled away from it.
No, that was good. The making it more conceptual. And so as far as the way that you go about teaching it, is that, taking examples from different places? Like how do you try to turn it from feeling like a really applied math course to something that is sort of real life based? That seems like it's an important core of what you do.
For sure. I mean, there's trying to get students to see that physics is all around them and they can apply it in different ways is one thing for sure. I'm a cycling commuter, and I regularly talk about the process of cycling to work. And as one of my starting points in class, like today, it was pouring rain and there was wet leaves everywhere. And so my braking distances were much bigger. So I had to adjust what I was doing, and just sort of bringing up constant reminders of where it is. Or, lots of high school students play sports and talk about, if you're throwing a ball, the amount of torque you get with a longer arm and then a shorter arm is just, an interesting example of how to bring that up. And the other sort of side of it is getting students talking about physics instead of just doing calculations. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on in physics education research, but that's really sort of aimed at the college and university audience. But there's lots of pieces that transfer down into high school teaching that make it a really kind of more interactive course. So I use Eric Mazur's Pure Instruction quite a bit, where students are doing conceptual questions, individual, do a poll, have them talk about it with each other and justify their answers, and having them say the physics out loud changes it from purely a mathematical thing to having to explain it point of view.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, as somebody who does physics quite often, I very rarely have to chug through a really numerically intense calculation. A lot of it is sort of conceptual and like having a general idea of how things sort of work. So you identified sports as being a great place for this, and especially cycling. In one of my undergrad or in at my undergrad, there was a course that I never ended up getting to take. It was the physics of triathlon. It was
Cool.
just this really enthusiast of triathlon in general, and I think it was aimed at the sort of the kinesiology group to give them like the breadth requirement that they needed. But cycling has got to be one of my favorite things to think about physics wise.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Braking
And
distances, air drag, all this stuff.
And you talk about the idea of like rarely are you doing big number calculations, but that's sort of what the perception of what high school physics is. And so also like trying to do questions that become down to like what you call napkin math, where you're trying to like make an approximation and sort of get a ballpark number of what this might be. Another way of showing students that there's physics that they can do on a regular basis that works out.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's not only like a very powerful technique that like being able to do like ballpark calculations is like so important on a day-to-day basis, even just like calculating a tip or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be like a gratuitous numbery calculation. Just sort of get a feel for what percentages mean and rough sizes of things. How have students taken to this sort of change? Certainly you wouldn't have an A/B comparison within the same group, but have you sort of brought more and more of these things into your classes, and if so, how have students kind of responded?
I think that it overall has made the class more dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And the students, within a group don't know what it was beforehand, so they don't have the same reference point. But me from externally, there seems to be a lot more talking about physics going on in the moments in between when I'm teaching. Like when they're doing a lab and they're like, oh, here, let's try this. And oh, this from last week, that applies here. And they're that kind of conversation.
Yep.
I also do cooperative problem solving, where I give them more challenging questions and I'm on a big whiteboard. And I don't really give them a lot of prompting. And they're like, I don't know where to start. But then somebody says, oh, let's try this. And sort of hey, how about that? And they eventually like they struggle at first and they realize that they're struggling. But then when they have the aha moment, it's like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And the conversation really goes.
That's cool. That's got to be a very rewarding feeling.
It is.
Seeing them actually like get engaged in this.
Yeah.
I've one more question for now about the in-class stuff that you do. You mentioned that you do the physics labs in class. I know what my in-class physics labs looked like in high school. There's a lot of like long springs, but I don't know where you guys source these from. But what kind of stuff do you do these days?
So I shifted away from sort of the formal lab right up and doing like a small number of formal labs to doing much more easily accessible one pagers where they can do some calculations, show a principle and understanding, and would also work on sort of lab skills along the way.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that's changed since when I went through high school physics is digital data collection sensors. A couple companies, Vernier and Pasco, make these things now. And so we have one that'll measure magnetic field at a pretty good value, or acceleration probes and force probes, which really changed the nature of what they can do. Last week, my physics students were doing static equilibrium, and I had a bunch of things hanging from the ceiling with digital force probes that they connect to with their Chromebooks, and they had to come up with the unknown mass for all the different things that were hanging by getting the force readings and measuring the angles. And so they had 5 things. Yeah, they had 5 things. And they had to give me their masses. Then I had a spreadsheet that would do the calculation of the percent errors. And the team that was the lowest overall percent error got chocolate out of it. So just giving some external motivation. This afternoon, I'm going to do a lab with my 12s where taking a ring stand and a force sensor, and then have a constant velocity car that goes in a circle, and then measure by changing the speed of the car, plot the speed versus the force. Or the force versus the speed rather, and just starting principles of centripetal acceleration, things like that is sort of what I look at for labs.
Smart. Having that that device that's always one of these super hard concepts for a good group of people to wrap their head around. I know I still kind of struggle with the idea of centripetal and centrifugal. Like it's all
there's an app called Fifox that lets you access so many different sensors.
What was that called again?
Fifox, Pyphox.
Okay.
It's got a good range of things. So whenever I take off on an airplane, I put my phone on my lap and I put on the 3-dimensional accelerometer, and then get a good plot. Then I put it up in class when I come back the next time. And it's good. It's good discussion.
Nice. Cool. So let's move a little bit let's move back to the panel a little bit.
Sure.
So you brought a perspective of teaching your 11s and 12s and sort of the perception that students going into university had. Could you tell me a little bit about the other people that you shared the panel with?
Sure. So Dr. Martin Williams is a professor of physics at the University of Guelph. And he talked about his perspective as a university professor who's seeing students actually in the classroom at the university level, and how a little bit varied from my perspective as a high school teacher, but he said a lot of the same things, that really it's a focus on problem solving and just sort of physics, thinking like a physicist skills is what really is important for students to arrive with at the university level, less so the idea of knowing this certain set piece of information, but more, can you think on your feet? Can you solve problems? Can you articulate, your understanding of physics along the way? And so we had similar perspectives along the way. And another presenter was Lisa Cole, who works for kindergarten to industry at York University. And so she's a former teacher who now works in sort of like changing the pipeline of physics, of getting more bodies into the room, because, university is pretty good at keeping the people that get into physics. But like you said before, there's not enough people that are getting in there. And then lastly was Anna Sophia Barrows, who's a diversity and equity and inclusion specialist for the Professional Engineers of Ontario. And she had an interesting perspective as well, because she did a physics degree, but then went into industry and had that sort of looking back at it as well.
Okay. So yeah, as far as I can tell, I feel like a lot of people understand the idea of doing a full physics, all the way through, ending up with a PhD and ending up in academia. But it sounds like the other panelists were very much interested in like getting people in the start of that pipeline, and then also the diversions that you can take that don't bring you to like an academic job there. I found it interesting. You were mentioning the first person on the panel, Dr. Martin, who?
Yep. Yeah. Williams, yeah.
Williams, that's right. That you both had similar perspectives on transferableness of a physics education. So I'm assuming when he's talking about this, he's talking about sort of the first and second year science students for the most part. Was that kind of his focus?
Largely, yes.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like you would probably be talking a lot of the same sort of trying to convince the more medical minded or the bio or kin type people to get in and take these courses. Did he have any surprising perspectives, perhaps? Anything that was contrary to what you would have thought, or?
Not a ton where we were particularly, a lot of it was similar perspectives across the board, in terms of how to support students and how to get students in and where the hurdles lie. There wasn't not a lot of disagreement between our takes on things, I think.
Okay. As far as the other two panelists, they sounded more like they were interested in the end product of a physics education. Anything that sort of stood out to you from their work? Like say keeping people in the physics stream, or offloading them into something that isn't necessarily physics based. Anything that like struck you as something surprising, or something that would help you reinforce the ideas that you were coming in with?
Yeah. One thing that sort of came up is the idea that there's a lot of work done at the high school level, sort of change perspectives on physics and the ways that I'm doing it and some other things. But it's been slower to change at the university level and to find sort of that supports to promote diversity inclusion in a meaningful way. About 20% of physics grads are still about, roughly that value are women. And so finding ways to get more into the field to start, I think is a lot of the focus. I know that Lisa Cole was saying how she works, her organization actually hires grade 11 students that chose to not take physics in grade 11. They give them, sorry, try that again. At the end of grade 10, they offer summer work for people that chose to not take physics in high school at the grade 11 level, basically to give them a summer internship in the physics field so they can see that value of the physics degree or the physics as a field of study, to see if their mind gets changed about taking physics the next year.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool program.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I'd also I think it would be interesting if similar to that program, if you could get access to the people that did do a physics degree and then ended up somewhere else, having them be sort of a mentor as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I think the financial people would be a really interesting group to to follow around a little bit.
For sure, and I think there's not a lot of data out there on people that did a physics degree that went into finance. From what I understand, they're pretty valued for their problem-solving skills, and sort of their ways of looking at the system in a different lens. So it'd definitely be cool to get some data there.
Yeah, in recent years, my dad has been really interested in these sort of anecdotal stories, like the Big Short and all of these like quants and these off the radar economist type people that came from other areas of STEM that shook up the investing game or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
Seems like a small group of people, but potentially a very interesting direction.
Yeah, there'd be some cool stories to tell out of that bunch.
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as CUPC went, so your panel had the discussion with each other. You also, I assume, took questions from students as well. Could you get did you get a good read on where students were coming to this with?
Sure.
Like what kind of ideas they
so
had?
The group of people that were in the audience were a mixture of current undergrad students, but they also took in a limited number of current high school students, maybe as a way of getting them more hooked on physics as part of the pipeline. And one that really struck me looking at the list of the faces and the names in the Zoom call was the diversity is much better than when I was in physics. I finished in 99, so 22 years ago. The diversity is much better now than it was then. Was one of the things that struck me. And reading through the chat, as we were talking about different things, there was a lot of really good perspectives from the students in the group that were making me think about how I do things. And then the questions as well were excellent questions in terms of provoking us to think about things more deeply.
Mm-hmm. I've certainly found since doing grad school, the undergrads who are in the physics department, who make a point of being active in the physics department, are very inspiring when it comes to trying to solve a lot of these systemic issues within physics. I feel like there's always so many great ideas and so much motivation that they bring to it. It's probably pretty cool to get to talk to them in that context.
Yeah, it was.
Awesome. So was this your first UPC? And if so, are you going to go back?
I attended the Atlantic Undergraduate Physics Conference back in the 90s when I was an undergrad. I never attended the national one at the time, but I really enjoyed this experience. I did drop in on a few of the other sessions, and there were some excellent other panels going on and some excellent conversations. So yeah, I'd definitely be interested in trying to connect with it in the future again.
Cool. Was there anything you could bring back to your students? Did you tell them about your conference at all?
I did, yeah. I actually had two of my current students were among the high schoolers attending. And I came back and just told them about, there are lots of people that are active in this field that are young and interested in talking to people about physics. And so I might get one of my former students was actually one of the panelists on the undergraduate mentorship panel. And she might come in next time she's in town to talk to my physics students just about her experiences. And I realized that, for getting students interested in doing physics, having somebody that's currently in it is really powerful as a conversation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Especially, I think, especially students that are actively working through, they can come back and talk to high school students and give them a bit more perspective, show them that I'm a normal person as well who decided to do physics. I feel like that could be invaluable. Okay, so let's see here. As far as topics go, was there anything that we haven't covered so far that you were hoping to dig into?
One thing that I think is cool is a program that I'm involved in. I'll just pitch a little bit. Is called Step Up. It's called supporting teachers to encourage the pursuit of undergraduate physics. It's a U.S. based program that gets teachers trained up on the idea of underrepresentation of women in physics, and looks at trying to build the number of women in physics programs. One of the cool pieces that I talk about in the panel and that I use in my class all the time, they have a careers in physics lesson where students complete a matrix that describes what they are interested in and their life skills. Then they take it and match it with a deck of 36 career profiles. And these profiles are of people in a wide range of careers, but they all started with an undergraduate degree in physics as the minimum baseline. And so they can see perspectives of people that started in physics but went on into become an actuary or become a YouTuber or become all kinds of different things. And of those 36 profiles, none of the people there that are profiled were people who would have said at the age of 5, I know I want to be a physicist. There are people that took non-traditional routes to get there along the way. And 2/3 of the profiles are women. So it's normalizing women doing physics, which is a really powerful thing. And so this program of this organization, Step Up, started in the US 3 or 4 years ago. I've been working with it for the last 2 years, trying to expand it within Canada and get Canadian teachers using these lessons, and is looking to expand internationally as well.
Okay, interesting. I'll definitely check that out, and this will definitely go in the show notes as well.
stepupphysics.org.
Okay, and if people are looking to get the deck of professionals and things like this, is this they can just order them? I'm curious. I might want to order them for myself.
It's entirely free.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, and it's on the website. The American deck is on the main website. I've been working on developing a Canadian edition of it that has at least a few more Canadian profiles than the original one. Okay. It's hard to make a Canadian profile physics deck without including Dr. Strickland. Yes, she knew she wanted to be a physicist, but she's a Canadian with a Nobel Prize, so it kind of has to be included.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that'd be a fun project if you ever want somebody to help out with collecting
awesome,
profiles.
Yeah,
or
for
something. I got plenty of time coming up soon, graduating
awesome.
soon. So cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking and sharing your perspective. This was really interesting. I
enjoyed it.
So we have Step Up that we can share in the show notes. Do you have a website or anything like that? I know you're on Twitter, so we can share that as well. JM_MUISE. So that's where you are.
Yeah. I don't have a website. No, okay. Mostly because I don't have time to put it together.
Yeah. Okay, so
I'm
Twitter
also big
probably
on
the best way to find you.
Yep. I'm also big on experiential learning. There's a really cool program that I can pitch just because it's excellent for high school students. Is Students on the Beamlines. It's run by the Canadian Light Source, and it gives students the opportunity to travel to Saskatoon and conduct their own research at Canada's synchrotron. And it's basically like a mini master's project where they design a research project. They get to go there and conduct it, crunch the data in a day, and then do a presentation to a group of scientists.
Oh, that's so cool.
It is. I'm in my 4th group through, and it's really been some of the most powerful teaching moments of my career, is seeing these students really become a master in a really narrow band of science, and then have that pride going forward into other things they do.
It's really cool to see as well that there's a lot of learning that needs to happen and a lot of technical skills that you accumulate, but there are also a lot of things that a high school student can do that is real research.
My quantum mechanics mark is something I will not speak of the actual number, but it was not a great one. And I tell my students that I had some moments in university where it was touch and go.
Oh yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, that's also a really important, I think, perspective. Thanks again to Joe for being on the show. If you like this or want more science content in your life, head over to scientificcanada.ca. We host Random Walk, we host the Almanac, we host Gamer's Guide to Ecology, and we're ever expanding. So, see you there.